The roar of a gunshot echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, Montana Territory, 1875, as Willow Larson fled down the alleyway clutching a leather pouch to her chest. Her heart pounded louder than the thundering hoofbeats pursuing her. "Stop that thief." The bank manager's voice carried through the afternoon air, but Willow had no intention of stopping. Not when the truth was more complicated than what any of these townsfolk could understand. Tucking the pouch deeper inside her bodice, Willow darted around the corner of the general store, her blue calico skirt swirling dust as she ran. 5 years of surviving alone had taught her to move fast, think faster, and never trust a soul. She'd been branded a thief in 3 counties already, but this time was different. This time she was reclaiming what had been stolen from her family in the first place. "Cut her off at the livery." Another voice shouted, deep and commanding, a voice she didn't recognize. Willow changed direction, abandoning her plan to retrieve her horse. Instead, she slipped behind the blacksmith's shop and pressed her back against the rough wooden wall, trying to catch her breath. The sound of heavy boots approached, and before she could move again, a tall figure rounded the corner. The man who stood before her wore a well-worn Stetson, dusty from the trail. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's and the color of a summer storm, locked onto hers. A silver sheriff's badge gleamed on his chest, catching the afternoon light. This wasn't just any lawman, this was the newly appointed Sheriff Thomas Wyatt, whose reputation for bringing in outlaws had spread throughout the territory. "Madam," he said, his voice steady as his hand hovered near the Colt at his hip, "I believe you have something that doesn't belong to you." Willow lifted her chin, defiance flashing in her eyes. "Nothing I have was rightfully theirs to begin with, Sheriff." The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile, but something that suggested he'd heard similar claims before. "Maybe so," he replied, "but taking the law into your own hands still makes you a thief in the eyes of the territory." "Then I suppose you'll have to arrest me," she challenged, knowing full well that running now would only end with a bullet in her back. Sheriff Wyatt stepped forward, close enough that Willow could smell leather and pine on him, scents of the wilderness rather than the whiskey and tobacco that clung to most men in these parts. "I don't take pleasure in arresting women," he said, his voice lower now. "Especially ones who might have their reasons. I have my reasons, Sheriff, better ones than you could imagine. Then perhaps you'd care to share them while you enjoy the hospitality of Silver Creek's jail." He reached for her wrist, but Willow was quicker. She ducked under his arm and bolted toward the open prairie behind the buildings. She didn't make it 3 steps before his hand caught her elbow, spinning her back to face him. In the struggle, the pouch slipped from her bodice, its contents spilling onto the dirt, not bank notes or gold coins as the crowd now gathering expected, but a folded yellow document and a small golden locket. Sheriff Wyatt's grip loosened slightly as confusion crossed his features. Willow seized the moment, diving for the document and clutching it to her chest once more. "This is the deed to my family's land," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Land that Hamilton Preston stole when he foreclosed on my father's loan after adding a 0 to the amount due." For a long moment, Thomas Wyatt studied her face, searching for deceit. Finding none, he sighed and picked up the locket, opening it to reveal the tiny portrait of a woman who shared Willow's striking green eyes and determined jaw. "Your mother?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Willow whispered, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion from her weeks of planning, traveling, and finally executing her desperate plan. "All I have left of her, all I have left of any of them." Sheriff Wyatt closed the locket and handed it back to her, but kept his other hand firmly on her arm. "That's a serious accusation against the most powerful banker in the territory, Miss Larson, Willow Larson." "Well, Miss Larson, you're still coming with me. But if what you say is true, perhaps we have more to discuss than just the charges against you." As he led her through the gathered crowd toward the jailhouse, Willow heard the whispers. "Thief," they called her. "No good bandit," others muttered. Sheriff Wyatt's voice cut through the noise as he addressed his deputy. "Tell Preston I've apprehended the thief, but there seems to be more to this story than meets the eye." "What are you doing?" Willow hissed under her breath. Thomas Wyatt's response was barely audible as they climbed the steps to the jailhouse. "I'm a lawman, Miss Larson, and sometimes justice wears a different face than the law." The jailhouse door closed behind them, shutting out the curious onlookers and leaving Willow alone with a man who might be her only hope, or who might lock away the last chance she had to reclaim her family's legacy. Inside the jailhouse, Sheriff Wyatt removed his hat and placed it on the desk, revealing thick dark hair with a slight wave. The office was sparse but orderly, a desk with neatly stacked wanted posters, a gun rack, and 3 cells along the back wall. "Take a seat," he instructed, gesturing to the wooden chair across from his desk. When Willow hesitated, he added, "I'm not putting you behind bars just yet, Miss Larson. I'd like to hear your story first." "Most lawmen aren't interested in stories," Willow replied, reluctantly sitting down but keeping her back straight, ready to flee if necessary. "Especially not from women they've just chased through town." Thomas pulled out a chair and sat across from her. "I'm not most lawmen." "Now tell me about this deed and what Preston supposedly did to your family." Willow took a deep breath. "My father, James Larson, settled our homestead 10 miles north of here 15 years ago, built everything with his own hands, the house, the barn, even dug our well. We had good years. Then the drought came." She paused, fighting the tremor in her voice. "Father needed a loan to get through the winter. Preston's bank was the only option. The loan was for $50. When spring came and it was time to repay, Preston showed up with papers claiming the loan was for $500. And your father couldn't pay," Thomas concluded. "No, he accused Preston of fraud, but who would take the word of a struggling farmer over the town banker? Preston foreclosed, gave us 3 days to clear out. That night, my father," her voice faltered. "He couldn't bear the shame. I found him in the barn the next morning. He'd hanged himself." Thomas's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in his eyes. "And your mother?" "Died of pneumonia that winter. My 2 younger brothers went to live with an uncle in Kansas. I stayed, working as a seamstress, saving every penny and waiting for the day I could prove what Preston had done. And today was that day." Thomas asked, his gaze drifting to the deed still clutched in her hand. "Preston keeps the original loan documents in his office at the bank. I've been watching for weeks. Today he left early for lunch. The teller stepped out back. I slipped in through the side door." "So you did rob the bank," Thomas stated plainly. "I reclaimed what was mine," Willow countered, sliding the deed across the desk. "This is the original deed to our land with my father's signature. And this," she withdrew a folded paper from her pocket, "is the loan agreement I took from Preston's safe. Look at the amount." Thomas examined both documents carefully. The loan clearly showed signs of alteration. The added 0 was written in a slightly different ink, the spacing uneven. "This is evidence of fraud," he admitted, "but breaking into Preston's office and taking these documents is still a crime." "What choice did I have?" Willow challenged. "Preston owns half the businesses in town, including the newspaper. He's friends with the former sheriff." "No one would listen to me." Before Thomas could respond, the jailhouse door burst open. Hamilton Preston strode in, his expensive suit and gold watch chain marking him as a man of wealth and influence. Behind him followed Deputy Marshal Taylor, a thin, nervous-looking young man who seemed uncomfortable in Preston's presence. "Sheriff Wyatt," Preston boomed, "I see you've apprehended the thief. I'll need everything she stole returned immediately." Thomas rose slowly, positioning himself subtly between Preston and Willow. "Mr. Preston, there seems to be a complication. Miss Larson has made some serious accusations regarding the loan you made to her father." Preston's face flushed. "Nonsense. James Larson defaulted on a legitimate loan. The bank was within its rights to foreclose." "She has the original loan document," Thomas said evenly. "It appears to have been altered." "Preposterous," Preston sputtered. "She's a thief. Those documents belong in the bank's files. She broke in and stole them." "That may be so," Thomas acknowledged, "but altering loan documents is a federal offense, Mr. Preston." Preston's demeanor changed instantly, his voice dropping to a menacing tone. "I helped get you appointed, Wyatt. I can just as easily have you removed. You're new here. You don't understand how things work in Silver Creek." "I understand the law," Thomas replied, his calm voice belying the tension in his shoulders. "And right now I have evidence of possible fraud. I'll need to investigate further." Preston's face contorted with rage. "This is absurd." "Marshal, arrest this woman," the deputy shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, the sheriff gives the orders here," Fine, Preston snapped. I'll telegraph the territorial governor tomorrow. We'll see how long you keep your badge, Wyatt. He jabbed a finger toward Willow. And you'll hang for theft, girl. After Preston stormed out, slamming the door behind him, Willow released the breath she'd been holding. He'll do it, you know. He has that kind of power. Thomas leaned against his desk, arms crossed. Maybe, but not before I look into your claims. He turned to his deputy. Marshal, I need you to send telegrams to the circuit judge in Helena and the land office. We need to verify this deed and have someone examine these loan documents. The deputy nodded and hurried out. Alone again with Willow, Thomas's expression softened slightly. I still have to hold you for breaking into the bank. I expected as much, Willow replied, resigned to her fate. But I can offer you better accommodations than a cell. Mrs. Jenkins runs the boarding house across the street. She's a good woman, discreet. You can stay there under house arrest until we sort this out. Willow narrowed her eyes suspiciously. Why would you do that for me? Thomas was quiet for a moment. 5 years ago, I was working as a ranger in Texas. A wealthy cattle baron accused a small farmer of stealing his water rights. By the time we discovered the baron had forged the water rights documents, the farmer had lost everything. His jaw tightened at the memory. I swore then I'd never rush to judgment again, no matter whose side the law seemed to favor. And if Preston gets you removed as sheriff before you can prove anything? Willow asked. Thomas's eyes met hers, determination etched in the lines of his face. Then I'll help you as a private citizen. Justice doesn't require a badge, Miss Larson. For the first time since she'd entered Silver Creek, Willow felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps she'd found the one person in this town who couldn't be bought or intimidated by Hamilton Preston. Thank you, Sheriff, she said softly. Thomas, he corrected. If we're going to take on the most powerful man in the territory, we might as well be on a first-name basis. The corners of Willow's mouth curved into a cautious smile. Thomas, then, Mrs. Jenkins's boarding house was a neat 2-story structure with white lace curtains and the scent of fresh baked bread wafting from its windows. The proprietress herself, a plump woman with kind eyes and steel-gray hair, greeted them at the door. Sheriff Wyatt, she nodded, then eyed Willow with undisguised curiosity. This must be the bank robber everyone's talking about. Miss Larson is staying here under house arrest while I investigate some matters, Thomas explained. She's not to leave without my permission, but she's to be treated with respect. Mrs. Jenkins raised an eyebrow but nodded. Room at the top of the stairs is free. Dinner's at 6 sharp. As Thomas escorted Willow upstairs, she whispered, Does Mrs. Jenkins work for Preston too? Clara Jenkins doesn't work for anybody but herself, Thomas replied with a small smile. Her husband died in the war, left her this house and a strong dislike for men who think their money makes them better than others. You're in good hands. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. Thomas lingered at the doorway. I'll post a deputy outside overnight, he said. Not just to keep you in, but to make sure no one hired by Preston tries to get to you. This investigation won't make me popular with certain people in town. Why risk it? Willow asked, genuinely puzzled. You don't know me. You have no reason to believe me over Preston. Thomas considered her question seriously. When I looked into your eyes in that alley, I saw determination, not desperation. Thieves steal out of greed or need. You were after something else, vindication. He put his hat back on, adjusting it slightly. Get some rest, Miss Larson. Tomorrow will be a long day. After Thomas left, Willow sat on the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the day's events. For 5 years, she'd planned this moment, recovering the evidence of Preston's fraud. But she'd always imagined fleeing afterward, not staying to fight for justice. The thought was as terrifying as it was exhilarating. Outside her window, the sun began to set over Silver Creek, painting the dusty street in gold and crimson. For the first time in years, Willow allowed herself to imagine a future where she might reclaim her family's land and her place in the world. A future that now, inexplicably, included the steadfast gaze of a sheriff who believed in justice more than power. As darkness fell, she fingered the locket containing her mother's portrait. I'm close, Mama, she whispered. Closer than I've ever been. Dawn broke over Silver Creek with a chorus of roosters and the distant whistle of the morning train. Willow had slept fitfully, dreams of her father's farm mingling with Preston's threats and Thomas's unexpected support. She washed her face in the basin, smoothed her hair, and put on her only other dress, a serviceable brown cotton that had seen better days. A knock at her door announced Mrs. Jenkins with a tray of breakfast hot biscuits, scrambled eggs, and strong coffee. "Thought you might prefer eating up here today," the older woman said, placing the tray on the small table by the window. "Town's buzzing about yesterday's excitement. Better to let things settle before you show your face." "Thank you," Willow replied, genuinely grateful. "I'm sorry to bring trouble to your door." Mrs. Jenkins made a dismissive sound. "Trouble's been at my door since Hamilton Preston foreclosed on the Wilsons' place last year. Poor Martha Wilson was my friend since girlhood, died of heartbreak a month later." She fixed Willow with a shrewd gaze. "Sheriff says you have evidence Preston's been tampering with loan documents." Willow hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. "It's all right, girl. I'm just glad someone's finally standing up to that vulture. Sheriff Wyatt's a good man, new to our town, but fair. If he believes you, that counts for something." With that, Mrs. Jenkins bustled out, leaving Willow to her breakfast and thoughts. Around mid-morning, another knock came. This time it was Deputy Taylor, looking nervous as ever. "Sheriff asks if you'd come to the office, Miss Larson. Some news from Helena." Willow followed him downstairs and across the street to the jailhouse, conscious of the stares and whispers from townspeople. Inside, Thomas was reading a telegram, his expression guarded. "News?" she asked tentatively. He motioned for her to sit. "The circuit judge will be here in 3 days to review your case. Until then, you're to remain under house arrest." 3 days, Willow repeated, disappointed. "Preston will have time to cover his tracks. That's why I've already sent Deputy Taylor to confiscate all of Preston's loan records," Thomas replied with a slight smile. "Judge Parker is known for being thorough. He'll want to see if there's a pattern of altered documents." Willow's eyes widened. "You can do that. With sufficient evidence of possible fraud, yes. Preston's fighting it, of course, says we need a warrant from the territorial court, which would take weeks to obtain," Willow surmised. Thomas nodded. "Exactly. But Judge Parker issued a temporary order by telegraph allowing us to secure the documents until his arrival." Preston's furious. As if on cue, the door burst open and Preston entered, accompanied by a thin man in an expensive suit. "This is harassment, Sheriff," Preston declared. "My attorney, Mr. Holloway, agrees that your actions are outside the scope of your authority." The attorney stepped forward, handing Thomas a document. "We filed a formal complaint with the territorial governor. Until this matter is resolved, we demand that all bank records be returned and this woman be properly incarcerated for theft." Thomas scanned the document calmly. "Your complaint has been noted, Mr. Holloway. However, Judge Parker's order stands until his arrival." He looked up at Preston. "Unless you're suggesting we defy a federal judge," Preston's face reddened. "This isn't over, Wyatt, not by a long shot." He turned to Willow, hatred burning in his eyes. "And you little thief, when this is over, I'll see you swing." After they left, Thomas exhaled slowly. "He's desperate." "That's good for us, or dangerous," Willow countered. "Both," Thomas acknowledged. "Which is why I've arranged for additional protection. A friend of mine, Daniel Reeves, is arriving on the afternoon stage. Former Army scout, excellent with a rifle." He hesitated before adding, "I'd like you to show him the location of your family's homestead. If Preston falsified your loan, he may have done the same to others. We need to know what he's done with that land." "You want me to leave town?" Willow asked, confused. "What about my house arrest?" Thomas's mouth curved in a half-smile. "Technically, you'll be in my custody the entire time. Deputy Taylor will remain here to monitor Preston while we investigate." Willow questioned, her pulse quickening slightly. "I'm not letting you out of my sight, Miss Larson." "Not with Preston making threats." His tone was professional, but something in his eyes suggested his concern wasn't entirely official. The afternoon stagecoach arrived in a cloud of dust and commotion. Daniel Reeves proved to be a weathered man in his 40s with a quiet demeanor that belied the twin Colts strapped to his hips. He greeted Thomas with a firm handshake and nodded respectfully to Willow. "Tom says you've stirred up a hornet's nest," he commented as they prepared horses behind the livery stable. "Not intentionally," Willow replied, tightening the cinch on her saddle. Daniel chuckled. Few folks do. Still, sometimes nests need stirring. He mounted his horse with the ease of a man who'd spent more time in the saddle than out of it. Lead the way, Miss Larson. Let's see this homestead of yours. The three riders headed north out of Silver Creek, following the winding creek that gave the town its name. As they rode, Thomas filled Daniel in on the details of Preston's fraud and Willow's desperate actions to recover the evidence. Classic land grab, Daniel commented grimly. Seen it all across the territories. Banks foreclose, land gets consolidated, suddenly there's a railroad coming through or a mining operation starting up, and that worthless farmland becomes mighty valuable. You think Preston has plans for the land? Thomas asked. Men like Preston always have plans, Daniel replied. Question is, what's he planning to do with all that foreclosed property? After 2 hours of riding, Willow reined her horse to a stop at the crest of a gentle hill. Below them stretched a shallow valley, bisected by the silver ribbon of the creek. A weathered farmhouse stood in the center, surrounded by neglected fields. A barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded to a dull rust. That's it, she said softly. Larson Farm. For a moment, none of them spoke. Willow's eyes traced the contours of the only real home she'd ever known. Memories washing over her mother's garden along the south wall. Now overgrown, the oak tree where her father had built a swing. The flat rock by the creek where she'd spent countless hours reading and dreaming. Someone's living there, Daniel observed, pointing to thin smoke rising from the chimney. Preston must have rented it out, Thomas said, frowning. No, Willow replied, her voice tight. Look at the fields, they're unplanted, no livestock in the pasture, whoever's there isn't farming. They approached cautiously, following Daniel's lead by keeping to the tree line along the creek. As they drew closer, they spotted 2 horses tied outside the barn and a wagon partially hidden behind the house. Wait here, Daniel instructed, dismounting. He disappeared into the underbrush, moving with remarkable stealth for a man his size. Thomas dismounted as well, helping Willow down from her horse. Their hands lingered together longer than necessary, a moment of connection amid the tension. Are you all right? He asked quietly. I don't know, she admitted, her eyes fixed on the farmhouse. I never thought I'd see it again, especially not like this. Daniel returned 15 minutes later, his expression grave. You need to see this, he said, both of you. They followed him to the barn, entering through a small side door. Inside, the space had been transformed. Where farm equipment should have been stored, there were crates, dozens of them. What is this? Willow whispered. Thomas pried open the nearest crate, revealing rows of rifles packed in straw. Winchester 73s, he said grimly, new from the factory. He moved to another crate and opened it to find boxes of ammunition. Enough firepower here to start a small war, Daniel commented, examining a ledger he'd found on a makeshift desk. And according to this, there's more coming. Thomas flipped through the pages. Deliveries noted for 6 other properties, all foreclosed farms. Look at this, Willow called, pointing to a map pinned to the barn wall. It showed the territory with several areas circled in red. That's the Blackfoot Reservation boundary. Thomas studied the map, his face hardening. These weapons are being stockpiled along the reservation border. Why? Daniel pointed to a notation on the map. Railroad survey line. Seems the Northern Pacific is planning a spur that cuts through the northeastern corner of the reservation. But they can't build there without a treaty adjustment, Thomas objected. Unless they're planning to force one, Daniel replied grimly, or create an incident that would justify military intervention. Willow felt sick. Preston is supplying weapons for an attack on the Blackfoot, maybe, Thomas said, gathering the ledger and map. Or maybe he's just the middleman, providing storage for someone else. Either way, this goes far beyond fraud now. A sound outside froze them all in place, the crunch of boots on gravel. Daniel motioned them back toward the side door, but before they could reach it, the main barn doors swung open. 2 men entered, rifles raised. Well, drawled the taller one, a man with a scar running down his cheek. Look what we found, Pete, trespassers. Sheriff's badge don't mean much out here, the second man said, spitting tobacco juice onto the dirt floor. Especially when you're outnumbered. Thomas's hand moved slowly toward his holster. You boys want to explain these weapons? Nothing to explain, Scarface replied. Just storage. Now you folks are going to walk out nice and easy and we'll escort you to see Mr. Bentley. He'll decide what to do with you. Bentley. Thomas questioned, his hand now resting on his pistol. Richard Bentley, Northern Pacific Railroad, Daniel supplied quietly. Ambitious man with few scruples. Move, Pete ordered, gesturing with his rifle. Thomas made a subtle motion to Willow, positioning himself between her and the armed men. Let the woman go, he negotiated. She has nothing to do with this, Scarface laughed. Nice try, Sheriff, but Mr. Bentley will want to meet the girl who's been causing Preston so much trouble. Now move before we lose patience. As they were herded out of the barn, Willow caught Thomas's eye. His slight nod told her to be ready. For what, she wasn't certain, but she trusted him, a realization that surprised her, given how recently they'd met. Outside, 3 more men waited, all armed. They were marched toward the house, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across what had once been Willow's home. Just as they reached the porch steps, a distant rifle shot cracked the air. One of the guards dropped, clutching his shoulder. Chaos erupted instantly. Thomas shoved Willow toward the cover of the water trough as he drew his pistol in one fluid motion. Daniel rolled behind a wagon wheel, both his Colts already blazing, gunfire exchanged in a deafening volley. Willow crawled beneath the porch, heart pounding. Through the slats, she could see Thomas pinned down behind the trough, returning fire methodically. A shadow fell across her hiding place. Pete's leering face appeared as he crouched to peer under the porch. Found you, girlie, he grinned, reaching for her. Without thinking, Willow grabbed a rusted hand cultivator leaning against the foundation and swung it with all her strength. The tines caught Pete across the face, drawing a howl of pain. He stumbled backward, giving Willow the chance to scramble out the other side of the porch. She ran toward Thomas, bullets kicking up dust at her feet. He reached out, pulling her down beside him behind the trough just as a bullet splintered the wood where her head had been. Stay down, he ordered, firing over the trough. Who's shooting from the trees? She asked breathlessly. No idea, but I'm grateful, Thomas replied, wincing as a bullet grazed the trough inches from his face. The mysterious rifleman continued to provide covering fire, forcing Preston's men to seek shelter. Daniel used the opportunity to advance toward the house, taking out another guard with a well-placed shot. When I count to 3, Thomas told Willow, run for the creek bed. It'll give you cover all the way to the trees. I'm not leaving you, she protested. Not asking, he replied firmly. 1, 2, before he could say 3, the front door of the farmhouse burst open. A distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit stepped onto the porch, holding a shotgun pointed at Daniel, who had frozen mid-stride. Enough, the man bellowed. The next person who fires loses their head. That includes you in the trees, he added, raising his voice. I've got men behind you now. The shooting stopped, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the moans of the wounded. Richard Bentley, I presume, Thomas called out, keeping Willow shielded behind him. Sheriff Wyatt, Bentley replied with a cold smile. Your reputation precedes you. Now please join your friend on the porch and bring the young lady, I insist. Thomas hesitated, then slowly stood, keeping his body between Willow and Bentley as they moved toward the porch. From the tree line, another figure emerged with hands raised, a rifle dangling from one finger. Willow gasped when she saw who it was. Clara Jenkins, the boarding house proprietress, looking as comfortable with that rifle as she was with her rolling pin. Mrs. Jenkins? Thomas asked incredulously. Thought you could use some help, she replied calmly. Followed you out of town. How resourceful, Bentley commented dryly. Inside, all of you, we have matters to discuss. The interior of Willow's childhood home had been transformed. The simple furnishings her mother had treasured were gone, replaced by expensive oak pieces that looked out of place in the modest farmhouse. Maps and documents covered a large table where her family had once shared meals. You're trespassing on Northern Pacific property, Bentley stated, pouring himself a whiskey from a crystal decanter. This is Larson property, Willow countered, finding her voice despite her fear. Stolen through fraud by Hamilton Preston. Bentley raised an eyebrow. Preston assured me all acquisitions were legally obtained. The railroad purchased these parcels in good faith. For what purpose? Thomas demanded. Stockpiling weapons along a reservation border is hardly standard railroad business. Insurance, Sheriff, Bentley replied smoothly. The Blackfoot have been resistant to progress. Sometimes persuasion requires leverage. You mean intimidation, Daniel interjected. Or worse, Bentley shrugged. The railroad will come through one way or another. The government wants it, investors demand it, and progress requires it. Even if it means massacring innocent people, Willow asked, disgusted. No one wants violence, Bentley insisted, but the reservation boundaries can be adjusted peacefully or… He let the implication hang in the air. Thomas's jaw tightened. I'm placing you under arrest, Bentley. Conspiracy to commit armed insurrection against the Blackfoot Nation is a federal offense. Bentley laughed. With what authority? You're a county sheriff far outside your jurisdiction and outnumbered by my men. He gestured to the armed guards positioned around the room. Besides, do you really think anyone will take your word over that of a Northern Pacific executive, especially when one of your companions is a known thief? Perhaps they'll listen to a federal judge, came a new voice from the doorway. All heads turned to see an imposing figure standing there, a tall man with silver hair and a distinguished bearing, flanked by several armed men wearing U.S. Marshal badges. Judge Parker, Thomas breathed, relief evident in his voice. Sheriff Wyatt, the judge nodded. When your deputy showed me those altered loan documents, I suspected we were dealing with more than simple fraud. I decided to ride out personally rather than wait in town. His piercing gaze settled on Bentley. The weapons cache in the barn and your own admission of planning aggressive action against the Blackfoot is more than enough for federal charges. Bentley's composure cracked. This is absurd. The railroad has legitimate security concerns. Save it for your trial, Judge Parker interrupted. U.S. Marshals have already secured the other weapon stockpiles noted in your ledger. Preston is in custody in Silver Creek. He nodded to the marshals, who moved to take Bentley and his men into custody. As the prisoners were led out, Judge Parker turned to Willow. Miss Larson, I've reviewed your father's loan documents. The fraud is clear. I've already signed an order nullifying the foreclosure and returning ownership of this property to you, along with compensation for lost income during the 5 years it was wrongfully held. Tears welled in Willow's eyes. Thank you, Your Honor, the judge smiled kindly. Justice may be slow, Miss Larson, but it tends to arrive eventually. He looked around the farmhouse. It appears you have some work to do to reclaim your home. Sheriff Wyatt, I trust you'll ensure Miss Larson has whatever assistance she needs. Thomas nodded, his eyes meeting Willow's. I will, Your Honor. As Judge Parker and the marshals departed with their prisoners, Willow stood in the center of what was once again her home, overwhelmed by the day's events. Well, Mrs. Jenkins said practically, first thing this place needs is a good scrubbing. Those railroad men lived like pigs. Daniel chuckled. And some repairs to that barn before winter comes. I don't know where to begin, Willow admitted, looking around at the unfamiliar furnishings and the daunting task ahead. One step at a time, Thomas said softly, coming to stand beside her. You've waited 5 years. A few more weeks to make it right won't matter. As the evening shadows lengthened, they lit lamps and built a fire in the hearth. Mrs. Jenkins discovered some provisions in the pantry and prepared a simple meal. Sitting around the table that had once belonged to strangers but would soon be Willow's again, they began to plan the restoration of Larson Farm. Daniel and I can start on the barn roof tomorrow, Thomas offered. It needs patching before the fall rains. And I'll bring some girls from town to help with the cleaning, Mrs. Jenkins added. Many folks weren't fond of Preston. They'll be happy to help now that the truth is known. Willow looked around at these people who had become allies and perhaps friends in such a short time. I don't know how to thank you all. No need, Daniel said, rising from the table. I should head back to town, make sure those marshals don't need any help with the prisoners. Mrs. Jenkins yawned. I'll go with you. These old bones need a proper bed. She patted Willow's hand. We'll be back tomorrow with supplies. After they left, silence settled over the farmhouse. Thomas stoked the fire, adding another log to ward off the evening chill. You should get some rest too, Willow suggested, suddenly aware of how alone they were. It's a long ride back to town. I'm not leaving you here alone tonight, Thomas replied firmly. I'll sleep in the barn. There's a spare room, she offered. It used to be my brother's. The bed's probably still there. Thomas seemed about to refuse, then nodded. Thank you. Later, As Willow prepared for bed in her childhood room, now empty of her belongings, but still achingly familiar, she heard Thomas moving about downstairs, checking locks and windows. The sound brought an unexpected comfort. For the first time in 5 years, she felt safe. She opened her locket, gazing at her mother's portrait. "We got it back, Mama," she whispered. "We're home." A soft knock at her door startled her. "Willow," Thomas called, "is everything all right? I heard you talking." She opened the door, the locket still in her hand. "Just talking to my mother," she explained, showing him the tiny portrait. Thomas studied it in the lamplight. "You have her eyes," he observed, "and her determination, I'd wager." Willow smiled. "She always told me to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you, Thomas, for believing me when no one else would." "I recognize truth when I hear it," he replied simply. Their eyes held for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them. Then Thomas cleared his throat. "Get some rest. Tomorrow will be a busy day." "Good night, Sheriff," she said softly. "Good night, Miss Larson." As she closed the door, Willow realized her heart was beating faster than normal. She told herself it was just the excitement of reclaiming her home, of justice finally being served. But deep down, she knew there was more to it, something about the way Thomas Wyatt looked at her, something that made her feel seen for the first time in years. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. True to her word, Mrs. Jenkins arrived the following morning with half a dozen women from town, armed with brooms, mops, and determination. They scrubbed every surface, washed windows, beat rugs, and helped Willow sort through the railroad men's abandoned belongings. Daniel and Thomas, along with several men from Silver Creek, tackled the repairs to the barn and outbuildings. The sound of hammering and sawing filled the air from dawn till dusk. Each evening, the workers would share a communal meal prepared by the women before heading back to town. Slowly, the Larson farm began to look like a home again. Willow's small savings, combined with the compensation ordered by Judge Parker, allowed her to purchase livestock chickens, 2 milk cows, and a pair of workhorses. Seeds were ordered for spring planting. Throughout it all, Thomas was a constant presence. He rode out each morning from town and stayed until the last worker left. Often, he lingered afterward, sitting with Willow on the porch as twilight descended, talking of everything and nothing. She learned about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his time as a Texas Ranger, and what had brought him to Montana, a desire to serve justice in a place where the law was still being shaped. In turn, she shared stories of her family, the happy years before the drought, and her dreams for the farm's future. One evening, as they sat watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in gold and crimson, Thomas asked, "Will your brothers return now that the farm is yours again?" Willow shook her head. "I wrote to my uncle, the boys are apprenticed now, Matthew to a blacksmith, Joshua to a carpenter. They have lives there." She smiled wistfully, "but they'll visit when they can." "And until then?" Thomas asked, his voice careful, neutral. "Until then, I'll manage," Willow replied confidently. "Women run farms successfully all over the territory." "I don't doubt your capability," Thomas said. He paused, searching for words. "I worry about you out here alone." Willow turned to study his profile in the fading light. "Are you speaking as the sheriff or as something else, Thomas?" His eyes met hers, intense and unguarded. "Both, I think." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then, with gentle deliberation, Thomas reached out to take her hand. His touch was warm, calloused from hard work, yet unexpectedly tender. "When I first saw you running from the bank," he said quietly, "I thought you were just another criminal to apprehend. Then I looked into your eyes and saw something that stopped me: cold determination, yes, but also integrity. Honor." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "I've come to admire so much more about you since then." Willow's heart thundered in her chest. "People in town call me a thief," she reminded him. "Not anymore," Thomas countered. "Word of Preston's fraud and the railroad's plans has changed many minds. Besides," a smile tugged at his mouth, "the only thing you've stolen is my attention, every waking moment." Willow felt her cheeks warm. "That's quite an admission from a lawman." "I'm not just a lawman," Thomas replied softly. "And what I feel for you goes well beyond admiration, Willow Larson." As the last light faded from the sky, Thomas leaned forward slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. Instead, Willow closed the distance between them, her lips meeting his in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. When they parted, Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I should go," he murmured. "It's getting late." "Stay," Willow whispered. "Not, I mean just—" She stammered, blushing deeper. Thomas smiled, understanding. "I'll sleep in the spare room," he promised, "but I'd like nothing more than to see your face first thing tomorrow morning." As autumn deepened toward winter, the renovation of the Larson farm continued, as did the deepening relationship between Willow and Thomas. He spent more nights at the farm than at his quarters in town, though always in the spare room, mindful of Willow's reputation. Word arrived that Bentley and Preston had been convicted on multiple federal charges. The Northern Pacific was forced to reroute its spur line away from Blackfoot land, and Preston's bank was now under new management overseen temporarily by Judge Parker himself to ensure all fraudulent loans were identified and rectified. One crisp November morning, Thomas arrived at the farm earlier than usual, carrying a small package. Willow was in the kitchen, preserving the last of the garden's harvest. "You're just in time," she greeted him warmly. "I need someone tall to reach those jars on the top shelf." Thomas obliged, but seemed unusually nervous. After retrieving the jars, he stood awkwardly in the center of the kitchen, the package clutched in his hands. "Is everything all right?" Willow asked, wiping her hands on her apron. "Better than all right," he replied. "I received a letter from the territorial governor yesterday. He's appointed me U.S. Marshal for the Northern District." "Thomas, that's wonderful news," Willow exclaimed, genuinely happy for him. Then a thought occurred to her, dampening her enthusiasm. "But that means you'll be leaving Silver Creek, doesn't it?" "It means I'll be responsible for a larger territory," he corrected. "Including Silver Creek and the surrounding area, I'd still be based here but with more authority and resources." He hesitated. Unless you think I should decline." Willow frowned in confusion. "Why would I think that?" Thomas set the package on the table and took both her hands in his. "Because what I want more than any title or position is a future with you, Willow. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life." Her heart leapt, but caution tempered her response. "Your work is dangerous, Thomas, even more so as a marshal." "It is," he acknowledged, "but having someone to come home to would make that risk worthwhile." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking you to decide right now. Just to consider the possibility of us." "I've been considering little else," Willow admitted softly. "I just wasn't sure what you wanted." Thomas released her hands to pick up the package. "Maybe this will make my intentions clearer," he said, offering it to her. Willow unwrapped the brown paper to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Thomas explained, his voice husky with emotion. "She always said it should go to the woman who captured my heart as completely as she captured my grandfather's." Tears filled Willow's eyes. "Thomas, I'm not asking yet," he said quickly. "Not officially. I know it's too soon and you've only just reclaimed your independence. I wouldn't ask you to surrender that." He touched the ring gently. "This is a promise, Willow, that whenever you're ready, whether that's months from now or years, my heart is yours." Willow closed the box and placed it carefully on the table. Then, to Thomas's evident surprise, she took his face between her hands and kissed him with all the emotion she'd been holding back. "I don't need months or years," she whispered against his lips. "I know what I want, Thomas Wyatt. I want the man who believed in me when no one else would. The man who risked his career for justice. The man who looks at me like I'm the sunrise after the darkest night." Joy transformed Thomas's face. He lifted her off her feet in an embrace that stole her breath, spinning her around the kitchen until they were both laughing. When he set her down, he retrieved the ring box with trembling hands. "Then may I ask properly?" At her nod, he knelt before her, offering the open box. "Willow Larson, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, with all my heart." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Willow marveled at how life could change so completely in just a few months. From desperate thief to respected landowner, from solitary survivor to beloved partner, from a woman consumed by the past to one embracing a future bright with promise. Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve in Silver Creek's small church, decorated with evergreen boughs and red ribbons. Mrs. Jenkins had organized everything, enlisting half the town to help prepare food, music, and decorations. Willow wore a dress of ivory satin that Mrs. Jenkins and the other women had secretly sewn for her. In her hair, she wore white winter roses, and around her neck, her mother's locket, a connection to her past as she stepped into her future. Judge Parker himself returned to Silver Creek to perform the ceremony, declaring it the happiest duty he'd performed in years. Daniel stood as Thomas's best man, while Mrs. Jenkins served as Willow's matron of honor. As they exchanged vows, snowflakes began to fall outside the church windows, a gentle benediction on their union. Thomas's voice remained steady as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Willow for all his days. Willow's voice trembled slightly as she made the same vows, overwhelmed by the journey that had brought her to this moment. The reception was held at the newly renovated Larson farmhouse, or Wyatt Farm, as it would now be known. Lanterns illuminated the yard, and the barn had been cleared for dancing. Fiddle music and laughter filled the air as friends and neighbors celebrated. Late in the evening, as the festivities continued, Thomas led Willow away from the crowd to the quiet of the porch. Snow continued to fall, transforming the landscape into a glistening wonderland. "Happy, Mrs. Wyatt?" Thomas asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind as they gazed out at their land. "Completely," Willow replied, leaning back against his chest, "though it still seems like a dream sometimes. 6 months ago, I was planning a bank robbery, and now you're the wife of a U.S. Marshal," Thomas finished with a chuckle. "Life has a way of surprising us." Willow turned in his arms to face him. "Thank you for believing in me from the beginning," she said earnestly. "Even when the evidence suggested I was nothing but a thief." Thomas brushed a snowflake from her cheek. "I told you then, and I'll tell you now, the only thing you ever stole was my heart, Willow Wyatt, and I gave it willingly." As his lips met hers in a tender kiss, Willow knew with absolute certainty that their story, begun in suspicion and desperation, but transformed by trust and love, was just beginning. The land they stood on, reclaimed through courage and justice, would be home to generations of Wyatts. And the love they shared, born in the most unlikely of circumstances, would be the foundation for a lifetime of happiness together. Spring came to Montana Territory with its usual capriciousness, warm sunny days followed by sudden snowstorms, only to melt into mud and green shoots reaching for the strengthening sun. On the Wyatt farm, life settled into a rhythm of hard work and deep contentment. Thomas's duties as U.S. Marshal took him away periodically, but never for long, and he always returned to Willow with renewed appreciation for the home they were building together. During his absences, Willow managed the farm capably, assisted by a young ranch hand they'd hired from town. When Thomas was home, they worked side by side, planting crops, tending livestock, and continuing improvements to the buildings. Evenings were spent planning for the future, reading aloud by the fire, or simply enjoying each other's company. Word of their story had spread throughout the territory, the determined woman who'd faced down a corrupt banker and a powerful railroad, and the principled lawman who'd stood with her against all odds. Occasionally, people would visit the farm seeking Thomas's help with injustices of their own, knowing he was a man who valued truth over power. One warm May afternoon, as Willow worked in her vegetable garden, she heard the familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Thomas returning from a 3-day trip to Helena. Her heart quickened at the sight of him, as it always did. He dismounted with easy grace, securing his horse to the hitching post before striding toward her with a smile that still made her pulse race. In his hand, he carried a small package. "Welcome home, Marshal," Willow greeted him, rising to meet him halfway. Despite her soil-covered hands and the perspiration on her brow, Thomas gathered her close for a kiss that suggested he'd been thinking about this moment for all 3 days of his absence. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "And I missed you," she replied, savoring the solid strength of him. "Everything go well in Helena?" "Better than expected," he said, stepping back but keeping an arm around her waist as they walked toward the house. "The territorial governor is implementing new regulations for banks based on what we uncovered with Preston. No more unrecorded foreclosures or altered documents." "That's wonderful news." Willow said warmly. "Maybe other families will be spared what happened to mine." Inside the kitchen, Willow washed her hands while Thomas poured them both glasses of cool water from the pitcher. He placed the package on the table between them. "What's this?" Willow asked curiously. "Open it and see," Thomas invited with a smile. Inside the wrapping, Willow found a beautifully bound journal, its leather cover embossed with her initials. "WW, it's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the soft leather. "I thought you might use it to write down your story," Thomas explained. "All of it, your family's history, the fight for this land, everything that happened with Preston and the railroad. It's a story worth preserving, Willow, for our children someday and their children after them." Touched by his thoughtfulness, Willow leaned across the table to kiss him softly. "Thank you. I'll start tonight." That evening, as Thomas went through correspondence at the desk in the corner, Willow sat by the fire and opened her new journal. The blank pages seemed daunting at first, but once she began writing, the words flowed easily. They called her a thief, but the truth was far more complicated. When Willow Larson entered the Silver Creek Bank that fateful day in 1875, she wasn't stealing, she was reclaiming what had been wrongfully taken from her family. As she wrote, Thomas occasionally glanced up from his work, watching the play of firelight on her face and the intent expression as she captured their extraordinary journey. His heart swelled with love and pride for this remarkable woman who had indeed stolen his heart and given hers in return. Outside, twilight softened the Montana landscape. Inside, the home they had fought for and won together glowed with warmth and possibility. Their story of justice sought and love found would continue to unfold with each passing season, each challenge faced together, each quiet moment of shared happiness. And somewhere, beyond the veil that separates this world from the next, James and Mary Larson looked upon their daughter with boundless pride, not just for reclaiming their land, but for finding the courage to build a future bright with promise and love. In the years that followed, the Wyatt farm flourished under their combined care. Thomas continued his work as U.S. Marshal, earning a reputation throughout the territory as a man of unwavering integrity. Willow managed the farm and, drawing on her experience with Preston's fraud, became an advocate for farmers facing unfair banking practices. Their first child, a son they named James Thomas Wyatt, arrived on a snowy December night almost exactly 1 year after their wedding. 2 years later, a daughter joined their family, Mary Clara Wyatt, named for both Willow's mother and the formidable Mrs. Jenkins, who became the children's honorary grandmother. The journal Thomas had given Willow filled with stories not just of their beginning, but of the life they built together. Stories of challenges and triumphs, of ordinary days and extraordinary moments. Stories that would preserve their legacy of courage, justice, and above all, a love that had transformed them both. And whenever anyone asked how the respected U.S. Marshal and the capable farm owner had found each other, Thomas would smile that special smile reserved only for Willow and say, "They called her a thief, but the truth is she stole my heart first, and I've never wanted it back."